Hey everyone, and welcome. In this program, we're going to be taking a look at a relatively unknown conflict known as the Lelantine War. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce and thank the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. For those of you unfamiliar with it, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of amazing classes and courses for creators. With Skillshare, you can explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. You can learn virtually any skill to help you unlock your creative potential. From photography, filmmaking, graphic design, programs like Lightroom, Photoshop, and so much more. One course that I recently checked out and thoroughly enjoyed was Video on a Budget. Prepare for your shoot without breaking the bank, taught by Christopher Rhodes, aka YC Imaging, who also has an amazing YouTube channel. It was just what I needed. If you've always wanted to start your own YouTube channel, or just learn the basics of operating a camera, then Skillshare is for you. The first 1,000 people who use my link in the video description will receive a free month trial to Skillshare Premium. So try it out and unlock your creativity with Skillshare. In the 9th century BC, the mountainous land that we today know as Greece, as well as the area to the east across the Aegean Sea, was dotted with numerous, independent, Greek-speaking city-states. Though a relatively rigid, hierarchical society divided up into various classes, for the most part, life for the citizens of these Greek-speaking city-states had been consistently improving over the past few centuries. However, by the mid-8th century BC, there was a huge problem. Most cities were experiencing massive population growth, which at the time was rapidly depleting whatever little farmland they had available. Faced with famine, many Greeks emigrated and established colonies in various parts of the Aegean, Mediterranean, and Black Sea regions. Those who stayed behind often found themselves embroiled in armed conflicts with neighboring city-states for whatever fertile land may have surrounded them. One place in Greece where good farmland still existed was along the western coast of the large island of Evia, specifically an area known as the Lelantine Plain. On the eastern end of the plain was the city of Eretria. About 24 kilometers, or 15 miles to the west, was the polis of Chalkis. Initially, relations between these city-states were both cordial and cooperative. In fact, the early trading post of Pithecusae on the Italian island of Istria, just off the coast of Naples, is said to have been founded by citizens from both Chalkis and Eretria around the year 775 BC. Within a few decades, other such settlements, and eventually full-fledged colonies, would spring up all over the Italian peninsula and the island of Sicily. The situation on the Greek mainland was different. With the population growth of both cities spiraling out of control, competition for use of the Lelantine Plain became exceptionally fierce. Finally, perhaps around 720 BC, the two cities came to blows over that vital piece of real estate, and what became known as the Lelantine War began. Since it would still be a century or two before the widespread adoption of writing in the Greek world, there are no eyewitness accounts of the war available, and this has led many to dismiss the conflict as a myth. However, notable personalities such as Thucydides, Plutarch, the poet Archilochus, Strabo, and even Aristotle have referenced the conflict in various writings. Initially, the conflict was similar to those between other city-states in that it was fought mostly between horse-riding aristocrats on both sides, although the poet Archilochus seems to describe warriors who also fought on foot and with swords in close hand-to-hand combat. Such conflict was common between city-states during the Greek Archaic period. What made the Lelantine War different were the alliances that formed between various Greek city-states, which turned the conflict into a sort of Greek World War. Thucydides, the great historian of another all-encompassing Greek conflict, the Peloponnesian War, stated that the Lelantine conflict was a war which took place at some point in earlier times between the Chalcidians and the Eretrians, that the rest of the Greek world was in alliance with one side or the other. From what modern historians have pieced together, Chalcis' allies included Samos, Corinth, Thessaly, Athens, Sparta, Erythrae, and several of their colonies. Eretria's allies consisted of Miletos, Megara, Boeotia, Aegina, Argos, Chios, and Mytilene. The few details that we have of the conflict imply that the combatants had some sort of code of chivalry and mutual respect that governed the laws of war. For example, Strabo claims to have seen an inscription that recorded the decision to ban the use of long-range weapons such as slings, javelins, bows, and arrows. The 7th century BC poet Archaic also wrote about this in the following verses. Not many bows will be drawn, nor will slings be common, whenever battle will be joined in the plain. Instead, the much sighing work will belong to the swords, for the warlike lords of Euboea are experienced in that manner of war. Later poets also wrote of the valor of individual soldiers who participated in the war, and how those who lost their lives on the battlefield were treated as heroes by their respective sides. The Lelantine War seems to have ended around 680 BC, but which side actually prevailed, if any, is still debated. Assuming that the war did in fact occur, it's a bit strange that later writers would omit such an important detail. Some evidence seems to indicate that the Chalcidian alliance may have been the victor, or at least suffered less, but again, this is not agreed upon by all scholars. One great casualty of the war, though, may have been the town of Lefkandi, which was situated roughly equidistant between Eretria and Chalcis, an extremely prosperous place in the 11th and 10th centuries BC. By 700 BC, it seems to have been completely destroyed. Regardless of the winner, and perhaps due to both cities being exhausted by such a relatively long war, the military and economic might of both Chalcis and Eretria were soon eclipsed by cities such as Corinth, Sparta, and Athens. Though the so-called Levantine War may have ended, its alliances, at least in the short term, did not. For example, Corinth and Samos, both as part of the Chalcidian alliance, came to Sparta's aid in their wars in Messenia. Members of that same alliance also supported Samos when the time came to fight against its great rival, Miletus. So I hope that now you know what the Levantine War was and what it was all about. Thanks so much for stopping by. I'd also like to really thank GrandKek69, Jaap de Graaf, Pasta Frola, Michael Lewis, Danielle Allen, Danny Van Eck, OneXTV, Robert Morgan, Frank, Tim Lane, Candice Whipple, Brendan Redman, Faridun Dadachanji, Sher Cam, Farhad Kama, and all of the channel's patrons on Patreon for helping to support this and all future content. Check out the benefits to being a Patreon member, and if you'd like to join, feel free to click the link in the video description. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as continue to listen to special audio programs on the History with Sai podcast. Thanks again, and please stay safe.